Alright, hey, welcome to another episode of Southern Style Off-Road Installs, where today we'll be doing 3rd Gen Tundra. We'll be installing the Icon Stage 8 kit, which includes front coilovers with remote reservoir, the upper control arms, all the bushings and things like that for that. We have the leaf springs down there, which will require the U-bolts. Also rear shocks as well. Alright, so at this point, all I've really done is supported the rear axle, and then just taking the hardware, the bolts out of the shocks. I'm taking those out first. That way the axle has room to droop, because these are what max out the travel. So I got the shocks out, and next I'm going to move on to making sure I have all of the brake lines and the ABS wires and things like that out of the way. That way we don't stretch any of those out, because we're going to have to drop the axle pretty far in order to put the other leaf springs in. So after I make sure all of that's clear out of the way, then we're going to actually go ahead and take the springs out. I am disappointed. The filler neck bracket is blocking my path to this 12mm bolt. That's okay. I'll move it off. So right now I'm undoing the bracket for the U-bolts. Make sure whenever you get all 4 nuts off that the plate doesn't just fall, because at this point it just kind of wiggles off of the U-bolts. These are kind of holding on, so I'm going to leave it right there until I put all of these down so I can keep track of them. Alright, so when you pull your brackets down, most of the time they're the same both ways, but I like to keep mine the same direction, so I'm just going to set this down the same way I took it off. As far as the U-bolts go, you may have to kind of spread them out or squeeze them in order to get in and out of here and off of the leaf springs, because they fit pretty tight. They're made to be that way. Move this one out of the groove so it's on there pretty good. There's a little groove that'll end up wearing into the side of the leaf springs. If you keep it in that groove, they'll come off a lot easier. Pulled that one out too. Alright, so that's that. I'm just going to keep these things together. The new U-bolt kit is all new hardware, so you won't need these or the nuts, because it came with all new hardware. But just to keep track of everything. Alright, so at this point I've got the axle actually lowered down off the bottom of the leaf springs, as you can see here. I've created a gap here just to relieve the tension here. So I'm going to take the leaf springs down. We're going to put the Icon leaf springs in, make sure that we have enough room. We may have to come down a little bit more, or maybe not. Just depends on your situation. Make sure that you support your axle so it's not able to twist side to side or roll too much forward to back, because once you take it off of the leaf springs, then it is pretty much free to move around and do whatever. So make sure you support it as you see fit. So I'm going to take the leaf springs off at the back first, because they have a 2-bolt shackle here. So you're actually going to have to undo both of them and get the bracket off to be able to slide this off of the stud, because the stud will actually stay on the bracket on this side. So both of those. Carefully get these out so I don't lose anything. A hole cut in the bracket for the bumper, conveniently, so that you can get in there. Alright, so now we just need to be very careful picking up on this. Pull the bracket out, set that to the side, and the spring should slip out. We may have enough room with the bushing in the front to just slip it out back here. Looks like we're going to have to go ahead and pull the... Oh, there we go. Alright, so just set that down. Since you have your axle supported, just kind of let it rest right there, and then keep your bracket right there, because we're going to be putting our new leaf springs in with this bracket. So on the front side of the leaf springs, It looks like the bolt head is probably going to have those little teeth to keep it from moving. The nut has a washer on this side, so there's not really a whole lot of room to get in there with the socket. So I'm just going to grab a wrench and do that from the inside. I've got this one kind of caught up in a bind so that it's not falling. Let's see what happens. There we go. Just try and use the supported axle in your favor as much as you can. And there's that. I mean, they probably weigh about 50 pounds or so if I had to guess. I'm really not sure. So I'm just going to set these off to the side, out of the way for now. And we're going to grab one of the new ones. We're going to try and fit that in place and see if we need to drop the axle some more. And then we'll do the other side as well. All right, so Icon sends the shims that go on the bottom of the leaf pack. They may or may not come in. Ours did not actually come already in there. I guess so that you could do whatever option you wanted, because there's 2 different options. It comes with an extra leaf. You can either separate the leaf pack and exchange the extra leaf with the 3rd leaf for option number 2, or option number 3 is to just add that extra leaf in between the 2nd and 3rd leaves. Or in this case, we're just going to run no extra leaves, which will give you just less than 2 inches of lift over factory ride height. So we're just going to install this shim on the bottom. You clamp your leaf pack together like so. Make sure you leave room for your shim. Just put your bolt back in. May require just a little bit of coercion. Get that straight, and then just put your nut back on. It's a 14mm nut. These springs are very high tension, so you don't want to use the spring pack bolt and nut to compress or decompress these springs, because it will damage the threads. You don't want to put a whole lot of torque on this, because it's not going to go anywhere. Again, you can damage the threads pretty easily if you try to put too much torque on that. So now we got this shim in, so we're going to go ahead and take it out of the clamps and install, and we'll do the same thing with the other side. Alright, so on the Icon's U-bolt kit, it comes with its own hardware. So I'm just getting my nuts and washers started on the U-bolts. So the new leaf packs, the center bolt that holds them together, in this case, probably all cases, the threads are too long for the bump stop here in the middle. So what you're going to actually have to do is just cut that off with a grinder. Angle grinder would be the easiest thing to do, just so you have clearance for the bump stop to go back on. And then you take your U-bolts and set them back on top of the bump stop all the way to the sides. And then that's when you can put your nuts and the washers back on, tighten everything up on one side, and then repeat the whole process again on the other side. We did have to manipulate the axle quite a bit to be able to get this in there, because it does hang down a lot lower than the factory leaf springs. But once you fight that in there and get the nuts and bolts started, then you just do the same thing on the other side. So if you take a look here, actually, you can see the difference between the two. So right here on this side, we have the Icon kit in there, and we have it mounted to the axle, and we pretty much have the axle, it's pretty level. It's a little bit higher on that side, but you see just the difference in space that we have. So there's plenty more travel that you can get out of the Stage 8 leaf springs. All right, at this point, I've got the bump stops in. I've tightened up the U-bolts for the leaf spring packs. You want to make sure that you try and get this bottom bracket even. So kind of like what you would do when you're tightening wheels, go in a kind of a star pattern. Put your bolts in the front and rear, but don't tighten them just yet. Wait till you set it down, then you can tighten them. There's a bushing in there. Tighten them at ride height. Put all of your brackets, like your brake line brackets and your ABS wire brackets, and your parking brake bracket, back in place, assuming that they reach. In this case, we're going to have to get some extended lines and things like that. So I'm going to leave these brackets loose for the moment until I set this thing back on the ground. There'll be no wheeling until we get that done, because it will actually pull and yank these things out. So we're going to talk to the customers, see if they just want to leave some of these brackets loose, because that's kind of up to you, whatever your discretion is. In this case, we're going to try and outfit them with as much stuff as we can, but at the moment we don't have extended brake lines. Also, I've got our shocks mounted in place now. And the bottom is just a bolt going through, just like a factory shock. And in the top, it's the same thing as well. It's just got the nut on top. It's got 2 nuts. One's a lock nut. So once you get your first nut in place, tighten it down. And then in this kit, tighten the second nut on top of that down until it gets flush with the top of the threads. And then torque it down to, according to the instructions for this kit, it'll be 50 foot-pounds of torque. But make sure you read the instructions on your kit that you get and clarify what the torque specs might be. And for this particular kit, there's not a space already available to mount the reservoir brackets, so we're actually going to have to drill a hole. And then the bolts they sent with the kit are self-tapping, self-threading. So we're just going to thread the holes with the bolts, mount the brackets back on here, and mount those brackets to the frame. At the moment, I'm going to wait for that. We're going to jump to the front. We're going to get all the main things done, and then right before we set it down, we'll do any drilling and modifications we need to do. And then last thing, once we get it on the ground, we'll tighten all our brackets back up. I got to take the knuckles apart to put the coilovers and the upper control arms in. So there's a couple of things you got to undo. Tie rod, the upper knuckle for the upper ball joint up here. It's good to go ahead and undo the brake and ABS wire bracket off of there so you can push it out of the way. It'll make it possible to get an impact on this nut up here, because it does kind of sit in the way right here. So you can bend that out of the way, get on there with an impact, knock that out. Let everything sit like this. Make sure to pull the bolt out of the control arm for the upper part of the ABS wire. Just like everything else, you're going to have to hammer these to break them apart to get them to split. What I like to do is loosen the control arm bolt just enough for it to move, but tight enough where it'll stay where you put it. That way you can just kind of put it where you want it, get it out of the way. So what I'm working on right now is getting the upper shock mount bolts, or nuts, excuse me, off. So pushing it down right there, just get it out of the way, and I'm just going to undo all 4 of those bolts up there. They are 14 millimeters, so obviously use the tools you think you're going to need. The 2 in the back are a little bit more difficult to get to, but you can definitely get on the 2 front ones out here with a ratchet and a deep socket. But they're really not that tight, so even just a small ratchet wrench or regular wrench will do the job just fine. So yeah, so the reason we're doing this obviously is we're doing the Icon coilovers again. So these are actually going to mount the same way, other than the 4 studs. It's going to be replaced with 4 bolts instead. But other than that, this is going to go in just the same, and then it's just got the reservoir that you're going to have to mount up here. And then the control arms, we already have these assembled. They come with the Xerx fittings for grease on the bottom of the bushings. These are poly bushings, so when you do get these in here, before you actually tighten the control arm bolt down, fill these with grease first. Pump it with grease until you start to see it come out of the bushings. Once you see that, you can actually go ahead and tighten it down just like that. You don't have to be at ride height, because these are poly bushings. They'll spin all the way around regardless. Then after you get that done, there's actually a Xerx fitting that comes with this. We already have it installed here. That way you can pack this ball joint with, Delta joint with grease as well. I got the coilover in now. Got the control arms in as well. We already got grease in there. We're just gonna have to grease this after we put it in. We've got to do the other side as well. All right, so yeah, after we bolt up all of this, get everything set back in place. For the front on this kit, we're gonna have to do away with these 2 clips and drill them out according to the specs on the instructions. And then they sent us some self-tapping bolts. We're gonna have to put those in there with the bracket. That's where we're gonna mount the reservoir to, like so. And we can also put our mudguard back in there as well between that. And do the same thing on the other side. So now we got our upper control arm and our spindle mounted together with the supplied nut. You'll have to hold the bottom here. These didn't really want to go on with an impact, so have to wrench them on all the way. This is a 10mm down here. This one here is a 22 or a 7/8. So just rinse that on there like that. So now I'm just gonna reattach all the little lines and everything. The ABS wire. There is a safety clip that goes on those that basically just go on there so that nothing can catch the release, and or if the release breaks off, this still protects it. So now I'm about to tighten up the lower shock mount or coilover mount. Basically you can impact that not until it stops moving, but until it's slowed down significantly. If it's still spinning real fast, it's not tight enough. So now just got to put our tie rods in, the spindles, tighten those down, put the cotter pins back in, and then go around and tighten all our reservoirs. And also I did have to loosen up the lower control arm bolts. So those are OEM rubber bushings, so make sure you set that on the ground before you retighten those, because those have to be set at ride height. Same thing with the leaf springs, those have rubber OEM bushings. So once we get everything on the ground, we'll go back around and tighten all the bolts that go through bushings. Like I said, the tops on poly bushings, or if you had lowers with poly bushings, you don't have to do that. You can tighten them up in the air. All right, so these are the front reservoir brackets that we're going to use. I have a little emblem in there. So what we're actually going to utilize is the 2 clip holes. So at this point, all I have is, I say that a lot. Let me get the splash guard back out. So all I've got right now is the splash guard pulled out. Just tucked it back there behind all this, just to get it out of the way. And this is going to mount in there, just like that. Well, in front of that. There we go. Go ahead. Drill that out. 11 30-second drill bit for the front, so it's only a slightly bigger hole than what's already there. So you just gotta make sure you get that square. And that's it for that hole. Do it the same on the other hole. Alright, and that's it for the front. On the back, you might find it easier to step up the hole, but basically what we're going to do on the back is we're going to mount the reservoir on the bracket, hold the reservoir up to where it would normally sit, center punch the hole that we're going to need to drill, and essentially if you can get just one drill bit to work, go for it, but I recommend stepping up the hole from a smaller drill bit to a bigger drill bit, but it'll be the same size hole in 11 30 seconds. The bolts are self-tapping, so they'll thread the hole once you put them in there, so it's going to be a little tight, but just thread the hole with the bolt, pull the bolt back out, then mount the reservoir to the frame. So that's what we're about to do up here in the front. Put your bolt at least most of the way in, so you make sure that the threads go all the way through the frame. You better just go ahead and get it, you know, pretty much all the way. Then you can use like a battery impact or anything like that to get it back out, make it a little bit quicker, but at least feel how it spins. It feels like it's pretty good. Feels like it's definitely threaded in there now. So I'm gonna get my impact. I think I have it behind you actually. Yep. I'm gonna try and pull this out. All right. Bolt's probably going to be pretty hot, but looks like we made some threads in the hole, so we're just going to repeat the process on this hole, do the same thing on the other side, mount everything back up, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. All right, so this is how it's going to look once you get everything done. So we got our holes drilled, we tapped our holes for the threads, so then I put the mud guard behind the bracket and just put the bolts right through those holes, drilled those in there, or sorry, impacted those in there, and then mounted our reservoir to it. So this is what it's going to look like after that. So got our reservoir out of the way, mounted up. I think it looks pretty good. So we're gonna repeat the process on the other side, then I'll show you how to do the back. There. Ah!
All right.
Okay, let me get out. Yep. Ow.
Okay, so Hunter, what are we doing?
Ow, that's loud. Hey, the safest place to be when your boss is center punching your hole is right underneath him.
Yeah. That's how you know it's good.
Yeah.
Hit it.
So Hunter, that's not what he meant.
Hopefully I didn't break this bit. Still looks okay.
All right, so you gotta punch the bit,
Yeah.
and we'll see you in a minute.
I'm just gonna apply pressure and spin it smooth.
Two hours later.
Told you we were almost there.
I like the way they do
Okay,
this too.
so I find it easier. The instructions actually say mount the bracket onto the frame and then put the clamps around it. I find it's a lot easier to put it on the bracket and then just use a wrench to tighten the bolt through the hole. So that's what we're gonna do now. We got both holes done, the other side's done. So I'm gonna show you kind of how you kind of have to force it up in here until you get it where you can line the holes up. Okay, so like I said, it's kind of a little bit of a pain to wrestle this in there and actually get the bolts in there, but got it in there. Tightened the wrench. That was the owner. He can say that.
No.
And stunt driver. And the stunt driver. All right, so, all right, got our reservoirs in there. Put the bolt through there, tightened it up, then tightened the clamps onto the reservoir. It's a little bit of a pain to wrestle it in there, but it will go. And so that's everything. So the last things we're gonna have to do once we get it on the ground, we're gonna put the wheels on, lower down, is secure the rest of the brake lines and the ABS lines back here on the axle and tighten up all our bushings. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Southern Style Off-Road Installs, where we have the Stage 8 Icon kit installed on the 3rd Gen Tundra. We also installed for the customers some new wheels and tires as well. And that's all for today. Customers are going to drive it, see what they think, and join us next time for another episode of Installs.